Thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, ma'am. As I get to my notes, recently we heard about a couple hostages that were released. One of them has been his second time being a hostage, I guess, Mr. Woodkey, that is. But I guess my question is surrounding the circumstances around his release, in that JNMIN supposedly released him without any ransom, and it's kind of unclear whether Niger had anything to give up in these, I guess, negotiations, as you may call them. If he was released without ransom, what's your assessment of JNMIN's motivation for the kidnapping?
Congressman, I'll be able to speak to that fully in closed session, but I will tell you this: this is an indication of, and we just want to commend and thank Niger and President Bazoum in his efforts to be able to release Mr. Woodkey. But in closed session, I'll be able to shed a little bit more light on what we think will unfold as he is interviewed.
Affirm on that, and I think we actually have a lot to thank Niger for, considering, as I call them, sort of the Alamo in the Sahel right now, and that you're seeing a lot of, be it our forces, be it our allies' forces, kind of gathering there and staying there and being able to operate in there and out of there in order to deal with many of the VEOs. On that note, talking about Burkina Faso, obviously that's experienced 2 military coups since January of 2022. You got these regional insurgencies that are linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. And then you're starting to see a little overt outreach, potentially, to the Wagner Group, which is active in neighboring Mali. Now, JNIM and ISGS, obviously the Islamic State of Greater Sahel, they control much of Burkina Faso's national territory. In particular, the northern and eastern regions have faced a surge in threats from Islamist VEOs since 2016. Now, unfortunately, you're seeing the French forces being expelled or actually removing themselves from that area. I've been working with my good friend Austin Scott. We've traveled to the region. We want to make sure that our service members, they understand the danger that they're in, but we want to ensure that they're paid accordingly with imminent danger pay, something that your predecessor tried to push through last May. A couple questions. Can you tell us whether service members in Burkina Faso should be afforded IDP?
Congressman, yes.
Thank you for that straightforward answer. Second, obviously, I remember asking somebody, I think it was in this position about 2 years ago, dealing with QRFs and the potential for quick reaction forces and the need for quick reaction forces, not just in West Africa, but throughout Africa, and realizing how important they are. And the question I posed to them is, what are we doing about QRFs? And they said, we're relying on our allies. With the French removing themselves from most of Africa, do you feel we still can rely on our allies for a quick reaction force? And if not, who can we rely on?
First of all, Congressman, thanks for asking that question, because what I have to do on a regular basis is assess the risk. Assess the risk of being able to respond to crisis. A foundational piece of that, a foundational capability, is intelligence, is surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities, so that we can reposition our assets to be able to respond to the probability of consequence. Connected to that is also being able to identify indications and warnings. That helps us do that. You know, I thank this Congress in the last couple of years, the last couple of budgets, the Warfighter Recovery Network has gained and bolstered capacity. But I need more. And you're right, Congressman. Yes, we still support the French, and the French supports us as well. But we're also building capacity into our African partners to be able to go into that calculus and being able to respond to crisis accordingly and cover some of the 16 high-threat embassies that we have across the ground and the men and women of Africa that are doing their due diligence in the execution of their mission.
Gentlemen, Doctor, thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman, Mr. Keating, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for your service to your country. So many of us are coming in and out because we have coinciding hearings, many of them related. So I just have a couple of questions, given everything you've been asked to this point this morning. One of them, I'm curious, Russia's involved in Africa with at least 20 countries for precious resources. That includes gold, and many of the Russian oligarchs are involved in gold mining and activities, and the reports that many of them are circumventing sanctions, and money's ending up back in Russia that's helping to fuel their war effort against Ukraine. What do you know about the ability of Russia, in the last analysis, getting some of those revenues to help fuel their efforts in defiance of the sanctions? General?
Congressman, I've been briefed that that's exactly what's going on. Vinny Prigozhin and the head of this private military company, that's what they are the vanguard back to the Russian Federation. And they do it through profit, cash and profit. So they have a false value proposition, especially the fragile governments across West Africa, where I characterize at the tipping point, which are looking for assistance to be able to provide security in the face of violent extremist organizations. And sometimes they select Wagner to do it, but Wagner has a hidden agenda, road mapping into their closest mine, whether it be gold or diamonds. That's what I'm concerned about. There is a revenue stream back to the Russian Federation.
Anyone like?
Congressman, I would just add 2 points. One is that with the designation of Wagner as a transnational criminal organization, we have new instruments to constrain its ability to move money freely, and the Biden administration is focusing on those instruments. And secondly, in the realm of sanctions evasion and illicit moving of money and resources, similarly, we are focused on sanctions enforcement, working with countries to shut down banks that Russia is using to move money, and we can talk more about it in a classified setting if you'd like.
Great. Well, thank you for those efforts. Our effort is to try and choke off as much resourcing as we can to Russia during this period. Even though, General Kurilla, you obviously said in terms of Bagram that decision's made already, but it keeps being asked all the time. So could you tell me from this present standpoint, what would be a quote-unquote small footprint in Bagram? I mean, you need support forces. You just can't have a small footprint there. Can you just give us an approximate idea? I mean, how many people would it take, not just to have a quote-unquote small footprint, but to be able to support it safely?
I mean, I couldn't give you an exact number right now because it would all depend on the threat. If we were back in Bagram right now, you would have the Taliban trying to attack us as well as ISIS-K.
That's what I mean, right now. So it wouldn't just be a small footprint. You'd need support services in maybe the tens of thousands, or just in total to make sure that you have a secure.
It would be based on the threat and the size of the force you're there, and what is the mission that they're there for?
Yeah, just a presence there in terms of intelligence.
Well, you'd have to secure the entire base, and that would require a security force, and then if you're bringing in the intelligence apparatus and all the support structure.
Right. So my inclination is, presently, there's no such thing as a small footprint in that regard. I'd just like to ask this. This is troubling. The situation in the Middle East is getting worse. We're approaching the coinciding holidays. Our efforts as a country, as well as Jordan, Egypt, and other countries, is just trying to get through the holidays, just trying to keep calm through the holidays. But the situation, and it was shared with this committee by people in the region prior to this, is how really fragile Palestine is right now. and how these threats of disruption, even during the holidays, could trigger a collapse even. What would happen? What would be the impact of that in the region, Hamas and other groups? And can you just give us some of your feelings on what that would mean? Because we're being told it's very real at this point, and that's why we're working so hard to keep it calm.
So Congressman, I think the concern right now is that there are all the kindling and the tinder is there for a flashpoint, and it can take just one incident that can cause that fire to start inside the West Bank, and I think it would be bad for the entire region.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Horsford, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and to the ranking member for this important hearing. As this committee knows, Russia and China continue to challenge American influence in Africa and the Middle East. In 2021, trade between Africa and China surged to $254 billion, up about 35% as Chinese exports increased to the continent. China has steadily increased its influence in Africa by promoting a political and economic model for countries on the continent, all while the United States has fallen behind on investment. Algeria, a global energy exporter with Africa's largest defense budget, continues to be one of Russia's top arms export clients, behind only India and China. So I was glad to see that the conclusion of the 2021 Global Posture Review directed under Secretary Austin included ensuring that the Department of Defense appropriately monitors threats from regional extremist groups, supports our diplomatic activities, and enable our allies and partners in Africa. General Langley, it's good to see you again. This committee has heard from combatant commanders time and again that global competitors, specifically China, outcompete us by responding to partner nations faster than we can. Is that an accurate assessment of the problem from your perspective? And if so, what additional authorities do you need to meet security challenges in a responsive way?
Congressman, thanks for that question. And I'll answer it in just saying that we need to be the partner of choice through various actions or through the whole of governance. From the military standpoint, when I engage with our partners on the continent, they said our near and present danger right now are about extremist organizations. I have the portfolio available to be able to build partnership and capacity with them so they can professionalize their forces, train their forces in the face of the threat, their immediate threat. I don't think China does that. China will sell them weapon systems that will be in a weapon system graveyard within a couple of years. So that's that value proposition that I have leverage, that I need to continue to leverage, but that system needs to work, be more responsive. Our Title 10, 333 authorities, that process is kind of slow. Our foreign military sales, that process is very slow, where China can operate at the speed of relevance. So we need to get that back. But across the whole of governments, just in the developmental realm, as they start looking at their societies and building their societies and for the citizens in the name of democracy, they want to be able to do that. So their development programs in U.S.A. need to have flexible funding. As such, in our State Department, as they build capacity across the government.
Thank you. And General Kurilla, can you describe the threat China and Russia pose in your respective area of responsibility?
Thanks, Congressman. Again, what we've seen is them go in with their economic, and that's where we have 19 of 21 countries have signed a Belt and Road agreement with China. And what a lot of them don't understand is the predatory nature of the financing or how they are doing that when they come into the region. We've seen it with their informational, their military. As I look at the military domain, which is my business, they come in very quickly. They bring out the whole catalog of equipment. They allow them to ship very quickly. They give them financing, and they have no end user agreement. As Mike said, we do see a lot of their equipment ends up breaking, but our partners have real security needs based on the region, and what China is doing is very quickly filling that for them. So I think there are things that we can do to improve our foreign military sales. Because when you buy into the American system, you buy into the quality, you buy into the training, you buy into the upgrades, you buy into the sustainment, but you're also buying into the bureaucracy as well. In terms of Russia, we are seeing them in Syria. They want to undermine our efforts in the Middle East, and they want a permanent basing to that warm water port where they signed the Port of Tartus for 49-year lease, and now Assad is asking them to stay longer, is what it looks like.
Well, I'm pleased to see the Biden administration's step up engagement with Africa as a counterweight to China's influence on the continent. And I am glad to see both the First Lady, Jill Biden, which focused on the United States' commitment to the region. And I look forward to the Vice President's visit to the continent later this month, which will only strengthen that commitment. Now I think it's the committee's job to follow suit. We must continue our investment in Africa's future and stability, and I want to thank the panel for taking our questions today, and I look forward to working with you on this important issue. Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Jacobs, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our briefers. It's great to see you here. I also want to thank you, General Langley, for your service and all of your important work on the African continent, and also for your thoughtfulness today. I want to especially thank you for your comments earlier about the need for a whole-of-government approach to addressing good governance on the continent and how that is a key pillar of our national security. And I couldn't agree more, and I'm very excited to see the Global Fragility Act plans, which we should be imminently receiving here, and how you're going to put that into practice. So earlier this month, General Fenton and Assistant Secretary Mayer testified before the committee, and I asked about what lessons SOCOM had learned from our decades of counterterrorism operations in sub-Saharan Africa. And General Fenton largely deferred to Africom, so I'm going to ask you the same question, General Langley. As you know, despite 2 decades of our investment in counterterrorism in Africa and over $3 billion in equipment, training, and logistics, we've actually seen violent extremism increase threefold since 2013. And just in the last year, we saw it increase by 22% and fatalities up by 50%. And just in the Sahel, we saw a 130% increase since 2020 in violence. So I wanted to ask you, what lessons has Africom learned from this, apparent lack of success of our investments in the continent, and how can we take that moving forward as we focus on the region?
Congresswoman, thanks for that, and thanks for your visits on the continent, especially with the CODEL you went on, and that was a result of this blue map that's shown here of our investments on the continent. But getting back to your question. As our engagements with our African partners, as I go from country to country, knowing that it is going to be a partner-led, U.S.-enabled proposition or remedy to their fragile governance. And when they look at their immediate threat, and as you just said, that a number is really starting to metastasize across from the Lake Chad region, violent extremist organizations are starting to encroach upon the Gulf of Guinea states. So given that, my discussions with them is, I asked the question, that's part of my campaign of learning, what is the solution? What is the panacea? And they said responsible governance. Responsible governance is the enduring solution to violent extremist organizations. And they realize that. So just as much as they are buying weapon systems, they want to be able to bolster capacity into their total governments, providing for the people. And, as we look at President Sheikh Mohammed in Somalia, what story is not really told is how he's turning a lot of the al-Shabaab to laying down the weapons and repatriating them into the Somalia government. Those are the good news stories that are not told enough. So, Congresswoman, our African partners get what the solution is. We just need to help them across our whole government approach to get there.
Well, I appreciate that. I think getting governance right on the continent is going to be key, and I look forward to working together both on this whole-of-government approach and implementing the Global Fragility Act and making sure we're being very thoughtful about how all of DoD's activities on the continent feed into that good governance. I wanted to ask you about Somalia as well. we are increasing what we're doing there, increasing the tempo. We've recently put troops back in. I just wanted to ask, what is our theory of the case, or how does it end? When can we leave? What are we trying to get to so that we are able to actually not have troops stationed there anymore?
Congresswoman, I'll answer that from an operational perspective. What we're doing to enable President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed and the Somali National Army being able to take the fight to al-Shabaab and turn to and follow that up with being able to bring in the rest of their governance to go out to the outer regions and to the clans that have been turned, and also preventing famine, preventing effects from climate change. That is just a clear indicator that the campaign by President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed is working holistically. So given that, he is going to turn south and go into some of the regions where there's a stronghold by al-Shabaab. And I think he's going to be able to do that. But we will be with them until our policy changes.
Great. General time's expired. The General recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Kim, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I wanted to just kind of build off of that. So, Dr. Wallander, I would love to kind of hear your thoughts about the challenges that we're facing in Somalia. We are taking some new steps, as the General just articulated on that front. But you also kind of raised that this is in a broader context as we're seeing the African Union transition mission to Somalia's plan to draw down over the next 2 years that you were really kind of talking about as this critical 2-year period. So could you elaborate on just how you're seeing this, and kind of to the point of my colleagues, what is the end state that we're trying to get to here that will allow us to start to pull back some of our resources?
Thank you, Congressman. It's nice to see you. I would build on or endorse what General Langley just laid out, which is the key to our support to Somalia in countering VEO, al-Shabaab, is working with our partners and investing in our partner country. There's current operations, but there's actually been a period of time of training and equipping and working with the Somali Armed Forces, not only through Africom, but also through State Department authorities in developing the Danab Brigade. So it's a great example of whole of government work to build a security force and to enable a security force that is trained in American standards, that has trust and good relationships with Africom and leaders in Africom. And we're seeing the material benefits of that because we're seeing an increasingly effective force that also is working constructively with other regional partners in Africa in African-led operations that are enabled by U.S. presence in Africom's assets. But it really is a great example of an implementation of the approach that was laid out in the National Defense Strategy.
Well, I appreciate that context. Thank you. General Kurilla, I wanted to just turn to you. Some of my colleagues have asked you about ISIS Khorasan. I've heard some of your comments on that front. Again, we can talk about this in a skiff at a higher classification as well, but just to kind of situate for the American people what we're talking about here, what is the current that we can talk about in this forum right now about how many fighters they have, what their general health is right now?
Congressman, thank you. So the current strength of ISIS at the unclassified level is about 2,000 to 2,500 in Afghanistan, and that's ISIS Khorasan. When we say that, that is specifically for Afghanistan. But we do see the threat really coming from the al-Siddiqui office. That's the region that sits above it, but they're based out of Afghanistan as well. And it's not so much the fighters that it is their ability to plan and enable operations from there. Mm-hmm. We do know the Taliban and the ISIS Khorasan are fighting, but the Taliban is more of a blunt force to go after them and doesn't have the intelligence and the precision to get after the real threats that we are seeing.
So there is, that was something I wanted to kind of pull on, because you did talk about in your testimony as well that ISIS Khorasan and the Taliban, there continues to be challenges there, but what you're saying is that the Taliban is not able to kind of produce kind of precise enough pressure upon ISIS Khorasan such that some of the foreign threats are the ones that can be mitigated. Is that
just
correct?
To be clear, ISIS Khorasan and the Taliban hate each other, and they are fighting and killing each other. But the Taliban doesn't have the precision to go after the individuals. They will do large sweeping clearance operations. It can be disruptive to a point, but they're not doing the precision targeting of individuals.
What is the current, again, in this setting, kind of connection or relationship between ISIS Khorasan and sort of the core ISIS that we've engaged with in Iraq and Syria?
So the core ISIS that's in Syria, they are in charge of the global enterprise. And the general director of provinces, he was killed about 2 weeks ago. He is the one that would provide guidance for external operations. ISIS Khorasan falls underneath the Al-Siddiqui office, which basically runs from the stands all the way down to Indonesia. Mike has the Al-Qarar office. There's the Bilal al-Rafadan office, which is in Iraq and Iran. So they basically have this global enterprise. And what we see right now, the most prolific is coming out of the Al-Siddiqui office. And in closed session, I'll give a very specific example of how we've disrupted a couple of threat streams, and not all threat streams are kinetic in terms of our disruption.
Yeah, thank you. And my time's going to run out here, but I'd love to be able to follow up with you, General, and Dr. Wallander as well, just about what we can be doing to sort of increase cybersecurity efforts with our partners, and that's certainly something General Langley as well we can engage in. But it feels like a place where we can really engage. I'm hearing a lot from these partner nations throughout the Middle East and North Africa and elsewhere, so let's make sure we're engaging on that.
We're doing a lot with that, Congressman. Look forward to talking about that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank the gentleman. Thank all of our witnesses. We will now adjourn this. Oh, do you need to? You want to ask him a question? Go ahead, gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I know you've been waiting for this one moment, General Langley. I heard the testimony that you gave to Representative Gates, and I want to kind of give you a second go at this, just because I know you made 4 stars for a reason in the Marine Corps. That's not an easy thing to do, and Africom is a very challenging environment. I know our intent is never to create bad guys who are in leadership positions, and yet it has happened several times in our history. It's happened famously in Somalia. And you and I have suffered the consequences from that in our careers and the enemies that we've combated with. My plea to you, and then I'll give you your ability to respond, is that we revise our position on how we train and what kind of accountability we have, because it is obvious to me that we have created some situations, especially in Africa, where we've gone against people we've literally trained. And so I do want you to kind of maybe just give us an insight on how you think you can approach this with the collaboration of Congress and the President and everybody else who's in our chain of command to mitigate that for the future.
Congressman, thanks for the opportunity. So just going forward, as we look at our IMET program holistically, we probably need to add more capacity to it, because that's the last thing we want to do or want to see is some episodic event, such as a coup by someone that we formerly had trained in the past. So just broadening on that and focusing in broadening the curriculum that focuses on civilian-led militaries. Within that, we had that discussion over at National University amongst our partners at the Africa Leaders Summit, and where it was led by the Secretary of the Army and also representation from Senegal, General Sisi and myself, and where we pounded the table on this is a must. There was over 43 countries in attendance to that. So more of that. So as we focus on civilian-led governance, civilian-led militaries that actually fully endorse democratic norms and democratic values, and holistically core values, just to prevent this from happening.
Okay. Do you feel like you have the intelligence that and I'm not talking about personal intelligence, I'm talking about military intelligence, that required to decipher who is the good guys and the bad guys? And do you have the personnel that required in this very robust, dynamic Africom scenario?
Yes, the lay vetting process is in effect, and we take that very seriously, and we're very, very deliberate in our processes of vetting our African partners as they come into the IMET programs.
Okay. General Kurilla, just real quick question. in looking, we talked about keeping Iran from having nuclear capabilities, as far as obviously they have nuclear capabilities for energy, but as far as weaponry, we know what Israel's opinion is on this, and you stated yourself that we want to make sure that we avoid that at all costs. What does that mean? And I'm not talking about from a classified standpoint, but what are we willing to engage? How militarily, and we know politically we're engaged, and we can only do so much when we talk about negotiations, but how do we, from a military aspect, and maybe I'm going too far when I say unclassified, is there a way to posture that would create a scenario where they would back down?
Congressman, I really do recommend that that's in a classified setting if we talk about any of the Iranian nuclear program.
Fair enough. Doctor, do you have anything to add?
Not on that, but if I may, on the issue of military training, I think it would be a real, not just a tragedy, but it would be a great loss to American national security if the very regrettable fact of instances of military abroad who've been trained by the United States in IMET and other programs undermine what is an extraordinarily important program. There is no better way to build capacity and relationships among our foreign partner countries than the extraordinary examples of American military, professional American military, who fulfill their duties as American citizens. And you heard from the generals that they believe that this is a vital program. The civilian leadership in DOD fully supports the importance of these military education programs and takes very, very seriously the need to make sure that we are training the right people as well.
And thank you. I just want to add for the record that I believe that we also have to be very careful about an isolationist mentality because of a couple bad apples that obviously have bad results. Thank you. With that, I yield.
I thank the gentleman and I thank the witnesses. We will now adjourn this portion of the hearing and reconvene in 5 minutes for the classified portion in room 2212.